Taoiseach, last night the British Government published legislation that gives British ministers power to unilaterally override parts of the Irish Protocol. This move by Boris Johnson and his government is disgraceful and utterly reckless. Mr Johnson's belligerent approach to Ireland is part of a cynical attempt to cling to power in Britain at any cost. It jeopardises so much achieved by so many over such a long period of time. It fundamentally undermines the Brexit protections for Ireland that were so hard won, and it risks serious economic and political damage. Taoiseach, I shared the view of Minister Coveney that Ireland will not be the collateral damage for irresponsible Tory actions. So let's be clear. The British Government's plan to strip away the protocol is a plan to intentionally break international law. In a supreme act of bad faith, they intend to walk away from their legal obligations and agreements. And it's worth remembering that not alone did the British Government sign up to the protocol, in fact, they were central to designing its content and operation. The utter recklessness of this move is underscored by the fact that the protocol is in fact working. It gives the North access to both the British market and the EU single market of more than 500 million people. The North's economy is outperforming the English economy, business is growing and new jobs are being created, and of course cross-border trade has increased significantly and the all-island economy is thriving. And now the Tory government puts all of that at risk. We've heard voice after voice from the business community describe how this unilateral action threatens significant harm to business in Ireland and indeed in Britain too. It endangers thousands of jobs and investment, and we know the way to resolve implementation issues is to sit down and talk with the EU, but this is something the British have refused to do now for 123 days. Indeed, instead of engagement, Mr Johnson opts for shameful political play acting. Taoiseach, Tory disdain for political stability in Ireland is now up in lights again, and this latest move is part of a wider wrecking agenda that seeks to undermine the Good Friday Agreement and to rob our people of a better future. Mr Johnson allows the DUP to block the formation of an executive in Belfast, and Mr Johnson then uses this political deadlock as a threadbare excuse to break international law and pursue his self-serving agenda. But all the while, workers and families in the North are without a government as they struggle in a cost-of-living crisis. Is Gadiv Contortuk, the Vion Mi Vacontuk de Rocktiach Realtas Nebratana, Cunan Protocol a Haru. Tug Kirkwiga Aintaha Oireachtas ag Tastólu in Cudlasana na Héireann a Cussinj. Ní Dainhí Boris Johnson bully up their Éireann. Taoiseach, we need an all of Oireachtas approach in standing up to Boris Johnson's renewed attempt to bully Ireland. We will not be bullied. And we know that we're not alone. Boris Johnson's dangerous move has been strongly condemned in the United States, in Europe, indeed across the world. So in a spirit of unity, Taoiseach, I ask you, do you agree that the actions of the British Government are shameful, reckless and dangerous? And do you agree that we must now mobilise all forces in support of the Good Friday Agreement and for Ireland's prosperity to ensure that Boris Johnson is faced down?
Thank you, Deputy.
Well, first of all, I thank the Deputy for raising this issue. I believe that the publication of this legislation yesterday by the British Government and the contribution of various British Government ministers who have attempted to justify it was a profoundly dispiriting moment. I was in government when the Good Friday Agreement was sanctioned by our government. And I was there for the early stages of the Good Friday Agreement, and indeed as a member of this House I would have been there before the Good Friday Agreement, and reflecting on the transformation of the British-Irish relationship and indeed the involvement of the European Union and the United States in facilitating the Good Friday Agreement. What transpired yesterday, in my view, is a profoundly damaging moment in terms of the Good Friday Agreement itself. But more importantly, it demonstrates the degree to which the British government seems oblivious now to the various sets of relationships that it has engaged in, and indeed to an international agreement that it itself signed up to, promoted its ratification in the Westminster Parliament, and now have unilaterally decided to potentially upend it. It's published legislation which would give powers to ministers to unilaterally override aspects of the protocol itself. And it is reckless, and it's, as I said earlier today, has the potential to destabilise politics in Northern Ireland. And also economically, it's incoherent, it's damaging, and it's the kind of legislation that clearly was framed without any significant engagement with industry in Northern Ireland or with business in Northern Ireland, because it's very clear from the manufacturing sector, from the export sector, from dairy and from meat, that the protocol has had an advantageous impact. And I've met with all the various sectors who've articulated that reality to me, and who were equally very concerned about the dual regulatory proposals that's contained within Minister Truss, Secretary of State Truss's proposals, because that would significantly undermine traceability within the food industry and would cause real issues for industry in general. And I'd met with the President of the European Commission last week, met with the Vice President, Maros Šefčovič. We've been in touch with colleagues in the United States as well. And as you know, there was a delegation over recently in London, Brussels and in Dublin in respect of representing Congress. And suffice to say that all parties find it very difficult to comprehend the rationale or indeed the logic of the British government's position, bar the domestic situation within UK politics itself. Fundamentally, what has happened here is a violation of trust. And the real difficulty is, if you enter into an international agreement with the European Union, colleagues across Europe are wondering, why would one enter into a subsequent agreement if the first agreement is so casually put to one side? I just want to reiterate one key point. The European Union has been flexible right throughout these negotiations. The European Union put forward and came forward proactively with proposals, having listened to parties in Northern Ireland, having listened to industry, and we had asked that they would go to Northern Ireland and engage, and they did. Not as a fait accompli, the proposals that were published last October, but as a basis for the resolution of legitimate issues that were raised by unionism and others around the operation of the protocol. It is my view that with substantive negotiations between the European Union and the United Kingdom government, those issues could have been resolved and still can be resolved.
Mary Mcdonald.
Thank you. Thank you for the response, Taoiseach. And we are in agreement that this course of action is reckless, but I would equally describe it as shameful and dangerous. And the rationale for these actions are well understood. The logic is entirely self-serving. Boris Johnson is quite prepared through all manner of means to do what it takes to hold on to power. And he's quite prepared to use political unionism in the north as a prop in that wider drama. That's what's happening here. He has actively colluded with the DUP to ensure that we have no government in the north. And then he cites political deadlock as an excuse for these actions, which, as you correctly point out, Taoiseach, aim to breach international law. It's very important, Taoiseach, that he does not succeed. It's very important that Boris Johnson is faced down, because this is about the protocol in the first instance, but it's about something, as you will appreciate, much wider and much more profound than that. The Tory government is pursuing a hostile, damaging attack against the Good Friday Agreement. It is as simple as that. I want to ask you again, Taoiseach, how you propose to mobilise allies in support of the Good Friday Agreement to face Boris Johnson down?
Thank you, Deputy.
Lord Dús Boris sé tá siúil an seo ná go bhfuil an cinenne tá déanta ag bhfuiltas na Breataine coithín sé aspa muíine i rialtas na Breataine fud na Eorpa agus fud ceannarí na Eorpa agus tá bunneachtracht dá inis ó sort go bhfuil siad chun an cóna seo de ré dalmh a chuir a le taobh. Just want to say fundamentally, and it's with regret I say this, that I do get the sense that this current British government don't fully get the Good Friday Agreement or don't understand the DNA of the Good Friday Agreement and what it really means in terms of the involvement and the co-guarantor nature of it between the British and Irish government, but also the wider interest from the European Union and from the United States. And parallel with that, we are now witnessing a denial of democracy, where people have voted in Northern Ireland for the convening of an assembly and the formation of an executive. It's not acceptable that the assembly has not been convened and that the executive has not been formed. The European Union, and we've had extensive contacts with the European Union in advance of this decision, will remain resolute and will remain firm and measured in terms of its response to the United Kingdom government's decisions here. Of that you can be in no doubt, and we have maintained constant contact and are at one with the European Union in respect of how we respond and deal with this latest decision by the British government. And I would repeat, it's our long-standing consistent view that it is only by substantive negotiations between the European Union and the United Kingdom government that these issues can be resolved.
On behalf